The cold seeped through the worn soles of Leo Sanchez's shoes, a damp, biting chill that felt like a personal insult from the glistening New York City pavement. He clutched his daughter Maya's small hand, her mitten a tiny spot of bright red against the monochrome gloom of their evening. They stood across the street from La Fenice, a restaurant whose name he didn't understand but whose meaning was perfectly clear. Through the vast, spotless windows, he saw a world of warmth and plenty. Patrons in fine coats laughed, their faces glowing in the soft, golden light. A fire crackled in a grand fireplace. On a small, elevated stage sat the most beautiful thing Leo had seen in months, a gleaming black grand piano, its lid propped open like a patient, waiting mouth. His stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot, a hunger so profound it felt like a physical weight in his gut. It wasn't just for food. It was a hunger for that warmth, for that safety, for the life he saw through the glass. Maya shivered, looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Daddy, I'm cold." He pulled her closer, his thin janitor's jacket offering little comfort. His gaze returned to the piano. He could almost feel the smooth, cool ivory under his fingertips. He could hear a melody in his head, a sad, sweet tune his wife, Isabel, used to play. A promise, made in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, echoed in his memory. "Never stop playing, Leo. It's how you'll remember me. It's how you'll tell our story." He had stopped. Grief and poverty had silenced the music. But now, desperation was composing a new, frantic score. He looked from Maya's face to the piano and back again. A desperate, terrifying idea took root. It was a risk, a monumental humiliation waiting to happen, but the knot in his stomach said he had no other choice. Leo took a deep breath, the frigid air stinging his lungs, and guided Maya across the street. The warmth that enveloped them as they pushed through the heavy oak door was a shocking, welcome embrace. A maître d', a man with a stiff collar and an even stiffer expression, immediately intercepted them. His eyes flickered over Leo's frayed cuffs and Maya's patched coat with disdain. "Can I help you?" The question was a dismissal. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel the eyes of the diners on them, their quiet conversations faltering. He swallowed the lump of pride in his throat. I saw the piano," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He gestured towards the magnificent instrument. "I'm a pianist. My daughter and we haven't eaten. I was wondering if I could play for a piece of food." "For her?" A few patrons snickered. The maître d's expression hardened from disapproval to outright contempt. "Sir, this is a fine dining establishment, not a soup kitchen. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Leo's face burned with shame. He felt Maya squeeze his hand, sensing his distress. "Please," Leo begged, his voice cracking. "Just one song. If you don't like it, we'll go." "I promise." The man was about to refuse, to call for security, but an elderly gentleman dining alone near the piano raised a hand. It was Arthur Harrington, though Leo didn't know it. "Let the man play, Charles," Arthur said, his voice calm but authoritative. "What's the harm in one song?" The maître d', clearly reluctant to displease a regular and influential patron, sighed in exasperation. "One song. Then you leave." Leo nodded, a wave of dizzying relief washing over him. He led Maya to a small, empty chair near the stage and whispered, "Stay here, sweetie. Daddy will be right back." He walked towards the piano, each step feeling 1,000 pounds. The piano bench was cool and firm beneath him. He ran his trembling fingers over the keys, a familiar comfort in an alien world. The low hum of conversation resumed, the diners having already dismissed him as a momentary, pathetic diversion. He could feel their judgment, their pity, their impatience. He closed his eyes, shutting out the golden room and the disdainful faces. He pictured Isabel, her radiant smile as she sat beside him at their own worn-out upright piano, long since old. He thought of her hands guiding his, of her voice humming the melodies he struggled to learn. He thought of her fading smile in the hospital, and the promise he was failing to keep. His fingers found their place. The first notes that emerged were quiet, hesitant, like a question whispered into the void. It was a simple, sorrowful melody, the theme of his grief. The tune slowly began to build, gaining confidence and complexity. The sound of clinking silverware and murmuring voices began to fade. One by one, conversation stopped. Forks were paused halfway to mouths. Heads turned. The music swelled, no longer just a sad tune but a raging storm of complex chords and frantic, cascading arpeggios. It was the chaos of the hospital bills, the eviction notice, the lonely nights, the gnawing hunger. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of his despair. But then, through the tempest, a new theme emerged. A soft, hopeful melody, clear and resilient. It was Maya's laughter. It was the memory of Isabel's love. It was the stubborn, unbreakable part of his spirit that had refused to die. The two themes danced together, a battle between sorrow and hope, culminating in a powerful, breathtaking crescendo that filled every corner of the restaurant with the sound of a heart breaking and healing, all at once. When the final note faded into silence, the room was utterly still. The silence stretched for a long, breathless moment. It wasn't the awkward silence of disapproval, but the reverent quiet that follows a profound experience. Then, a single person began to clap. It was Arthur Harrington. His applause was quickly joined by another, and another, until the entire restaurant erupted in a wave of thunderous ovation. The maître d' stood frozen, his mouth agape. The patrons who had snickered were now on their feet, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. Leo opened his eyes, dazed. He saw not scorn, but tears in the eyes of a woman at a nearby table. He looked over at Maya, who was beaming, her little hands clapping with all her might. He had done more than earn a meal, he had made them listen. He had made them feel. As the applause subsided, Arthur Harrington walked over to the piano. He was an older man with kind eyes that seemed to see right through Leo's shabby exterior to the soul beneath. "That was not just playing, young man," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was a confession. That was a prayer." He reached into his wallet and pulled out several bills, pressing them into Leo's hand. "Please, allow my friend Charles to bring you and your daughter the finest meal on the menu." He then handed Leo a crisp business card. "My name is Arthur Harrington. I was once the conductor for the City Symphony. I would very much like to help you." Leo stared at the card, the embossed letters swimming before his eyes. It felt like a dream. He couldn't form the words to thank him, so he just nodded, his throat tight with unshed tears. The maître d', now profoundly humbled, personally escorted Leo and Maya to a pristine table, his earlier contempt replaced by a deep, flustered respect. The following week was a blur for Leo. True to his word, Arthur Harrington provided him and Maya with a small, clean apartment in a modest building he owned, a temporary reprieve from the shelter. More importantly, he had arranged an audition for the prestigious Northwood Conservatory's annual artist residency, a full scholarship program that provided housing, a stipend, and unparalleled instruction. It was a golden key to a world Leo had only ever dreamed of. Arthur drove him to the conservatory, a grand, imposing building of stone and ivy that seemed to hum with artistic legacy. Leo, in a borrowed suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders, felt like an imposter. They were led to the office of the dean, Miss Evelyn Reed. She was a woman who seemed carved from ice, with a severe haircut and an air of untouchable authority. Her office was immaculate, dominated by a large mahogany desk. She listened as Arthur passionately recounted the story of the restaurant performance, but her expression remained neutral, her eyes betraying a deep-seated skepticism. She looked at Leo, taking in his ill-fitting suit and the nervous way he held his hands. Her gaze was not unkind, but it was analytical, a gatekeeper's assessment. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice crisp and formal, "while I appreciate your enthusiasm, our residency is for artists of the highest caliber. We have hundreds of applicants from Juilliard, from Curtis, from all over the world." Arthur leaned forward. "Evelyn, I have never in my 40 years of professional life heard a talent as raw and as powerful as this man's. Just give him a chance to play for you," she sighed, a small, concessionary sound. "Very well. As a personal favor. We have preliminary auditions tomorrow morning. Be in the main recital hall at 10. But I must be frank, Mr. Sanchez. The bar is exceptionally high. The small apartment felt like a palace. It had a bed for him and a bed for Maya. It had a tiny kitchen. Most importantly, in the corner of the living room, it had an old, scarred upright piano that Arthur had delivered. It was out of tune, and a few keys stuck, but to Leo, it was the most precious object on earth. He sat at it for hours, his fingers rediscovering their strength and agility. But as he practiced the complex classical pieces Arthur had suggested for the audition, a wall of anxiety grew around him. He could play the notes, but the feeling, the soul, was missing. It was as if the music was trapped behind the glass of a restaurant window, something he could see but not truly touch. He was a fraud. He was a janitor who got lucky one night. One evening, as Maya slept soundly in her new bed, he found himself lost in memory. The sterile white walls of the apartment dissolved, replaced by the warm, cluttered living room of the tiny apartment he had shared with Isabel. He saw her at their piano, pregnant with Maya, her fingers dancing over the keys. She turned to him, her smile lighting up the room. "You have to feel it, Leo," she had said, taking his hands and placing them on the keys. "Don't just play the notes. Play the story. Your heart is in your hands." It's a gift. The memory was so vivid, so full of love and life. He remembered her excitement, her unwavering belief in him, even when he doubted himself. He remembered the simple joy of creating music with her, their shared language. The scene flickered, shifting to the muted, terrifying quiet of the doctor's office. The words, aggressive, inoperable, the beautiful music of their life had been replaced by a deafening, painful silence. He shook his head, pushing the memory away, and returned to the cold, impersonal sheet music in front of him. The main recital hall at Northwood was vast and intimidating. The polished stage held a concert grand piano that looked like a sleek black panther, ready to pounce. The rows of empty velvet seats felt like 1,000 silent judges. Ms. Reed sat alone in the center of the third row, a clipboard in her lap, her expression unreadable. Arthur gave Leo an encouraging nod from the wings. Leo walked onto the stage, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He sat at the piano, the professional instrument feeling alien compared to the familiar clunkiness of his upright. "Mr. Sanchez," Ms. Reed's voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear. "You may begin when you are ready." He took a deep breath and began to play a furiously difficult Liszt etude. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a torrent of perfectly executed notes. He was technically flawless. He hit every crescendo, every pianissimo, exactly as written. But it was hollow. It was a perfect recitation, not a performance. He was playing for the intimidating woman in the third row, trying to prove his worth through mechanical perfection. When he finished, the final chord hanging in the air, there was no applause. Just silence. Ms. Reed made a few notes on her clipboard. "You have proficient technical skill, Mr. Sanchez," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But technical skill is common. We see it every day. I heard a story about a man who poured his soul into the keys in a restaurant. I do not see that man here. I see a competent musician playing notes." Leo's heart sank. She was right. He had hidden himself behind the music. Arthur started to walk out from the wings to intercede, but Ms. Reed held up a hand. However, she continued, a flicker of something, perhaps curiosity, in her eyes. "My respect for Mr. Harrington's judgment is considerable. I will allow you to proceed to the final auditions next week. But you will not play another's composition. You will compose and perform an original piece. The theme," she paused, her eyes locking onto his, "is resilience." The word resilience echoed in Leo's mind for days, a taunting, impossible challenge. How could he compose a piece about a quality he felt he had completely lost? He sat at the upright piano for hours, but his mind was a blank slate. Every melody he attempted sounded trite, every chord progression felt stolen. He was paralyzed by the fear of failure, by the weight of Ms. Reed's dismissive words. The hope that had ignited within him was dwindling to a faint ember. He was a janitor. He cleaned floors. He wasn't a composer. He was an imposter, and soon everyone would know it. One night, He was ready to give up. He decided he would call Arthur in the morning, thank him for his kindness, and return to the shadows where he belonged. He walked into Maya's room to check on her. She was fast asleep, her small face peaceful in the soft glow of her nightlight, a crayon clutched in her hand. A drawing she had made was taped to the wall, a picture of a big piano with a stick figure, a man with a smiling face. Underneath, in her wobbly writing, it said Daddy. A wave of love and shame washed over him. He wasn't just failing himself, he was failing her. He was failing Isabel. The memory he had been suppressing rose to the surface, demanding to be heard. He was back in the hospital room. Isabel was frail, a shadow of the vibrant woman he loved, but her eyes still held their fire. She held his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Promise me, Leo," she had whispered, her voice raspy. "Promise me you won't let the music die with me. It's our story. Your story. It's how you'll tell Maya who I was. Promise me you'll share your gift." He had promised, tears streaming down his face. That promise was the source of his profound guilt, the reason he had stopped playing. It hurt too much. But looking at Maya, he finally understood. The promise wasn't a burden. It was a map. It was the key. He didn't need to compose a story about resilience. He needed to tell his own. A new energy surged through Leo. He went back to the piano, but this time, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to write a masterpiece. He was simply trying to tell the truth. He closed his eyes and let the memories flow, not pushing them away but embracing them, translating them into sound. The first melody that came was quiet, tender, and tinged with a deep melancholy. It was Isabel's theme, the beautiful but fragile melody of their love overshadowed by the knowledge of its end. Then, the music shifted. The left hand introduced a jarring, dissonant rhythm, an unsettling heartbeat that grew louder and more insistent. This was the fear, the diagnosis, the sterile scent of the hospital. The two themes clashed, creating a chaotic, painful harmony. The music built into a frantic, desperate crescendo, the storm he had unleashed in the restaurant, but now with more focus, more intent. It was the sound of loss, of anger, of a world collapsing. He played through the night, the music pouring out of him. He didn't write a single note down, it was all etched in his heart. As the storm of his grief began to subside within the piece, he introduced a new melody. It was simple, almost like a nursery rhyme, played with a delicate touch in the upper register. It was Maya. Her theme was pure, innocent, and unbreakably hopeful. It weaved its way through the lingering sorrow of Isabel's theme, not erasing it, but comforting it. The music began to rebuild, the themes of love, loss, and hope intertwining to create something new. It was a sound that was achingly sad and gloriously uplifting at the same time. It was the sound of his life. Unbeknownst to him, Arthur had let himself into the apartment with his key, hearing the piano from the hallway. He stood in the doorway, listening, tears silently tracking down his weathered cheeks. He wasn't listening to a composition. He was listening to a soul speak. The day of the final audition arrived. The recital hall was no longer empty. A panel of stern-faced faculty members sat beside Ms. Reed, their collective presence a formidable wall of academic scrutiny. Leo felt their eyes on him as he walked to the center of the stage. This time, he was not the terrified janitor from the preliminary round. The borrowed suit felt less like a costume and more like armor. He looked out, not at the panel, but through them, seeing the faces of his past and the hope for his future. He sat at the piano and took a moment, letting the quiet of the hall settle. He looked directly at Ms. Evelyn Reed, not with defiance, but with a quiet, earnest connection. He was not here to audition. He was here to share his story. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of Isabel's theme filled the hall, a sound so intimate and personal it felt like a whispered secret. He played the chaotic descent into the storm of his grief, his body swaying with the violent emotion of the music. He didn't hold back, pouring every ounce of his pain and loss into the keys. The faculty members shifted uncomfortably, their professional detachment challenged by the raw, unfiltered anguish of the performance. Then, the music softened. The clear, bell-like notes of Maya's theme emerged from the wreckage, a tender sprout of green in a barren landscape. The music began to climb, to soar. It wasn't a simple, happy ending. The sorrow was still there, a deep, resonant bass line that grounded the piece in reality, but it was now the foundation for a triumphant, hopeful crescendo. It was the sound of a man who had been shattered and had painstakingly pieced himself back together, stronger and more beautiful than before. As the final, powerful chord echoed and faded into silence, Leo saw that Ms. Reed's icy composure had completely melted. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. For the second time, Leo's music was met with a profound, stunned silence. But this time, it was a silence of shared humanity, of deep emotional understanding. It was Ms. Reed who broke it. She rose slowly to her feet, her eyes never leaving Leo's. She began to applaud, a deliberate, respectful clap that echoed with sincerity. The rest of the panel, as if released from a spell, joined her, rising to their feet in a unanimous standing ovation. The sound washed over Leo, not as a validation of his skill, but as an acceptance of his story. After the applause died down, Ms. Reed walked onto the stage. She stood before him, her earlier skepticism replaced by a look of profound admiration. "In all my years," she began, her voice softer than he had ever heard it, "I have never heard a piece of music so honest. You didn't compose a piece about resilience, Mr. Sanchez. You are resilient." She extended her hand. "Welcome to the Northwood Conservatory." 1 year later. The sunlight streamed into a cheerful, brightly painted room in a community center in a less affluent part of the city. The room was filled with the cacophonous but joyful sound of children learning to play on a dozen donated keyboards and upright pianos. This was the Northwood Outreach Program, Leo's brainchild, funded by the conservatory at his request. At the center of it all was Leo, moving from student to student, offering gentle encouragement and a kind word. He looked happy, his face relaxed and full of a purpose that went beyond his own success. He was no longer just a performer, he was a mentor, a giver of the same hope he had been given. In a corner, Maya, now a year older and radiating the quiet confidence of a child who feels safe and loved, was drawing. She was sketching a picture of her father surrounded by smiling children. Leo glanced over at her and their eyes met. He smiled, a genuine, soul-deep smile of a man who had not only found his own voice but was now teaching others how to find theirs. The music, their music, was alive and well.